Hello, my name is Lee Mallon, and this is the first episode of AI Chat, where I talk with people from all sorts of industries around the world about how AI is changing the landscape for work. Today's episode is with a longtime friend of mine, Gavin Jones, who is the MD of a UK-based UX agency called Elixel, and we basically talk about how AI is changing and is going to change the digital agency space over the coming years. Enjoy. The more and more this stuff is just like we just said, is accelerating, and like what does this mean for all the different kind of industries out there, and particularly, agencies. That was my previous world. That's your world now. Is this even in the psyche of your customers or your team, or are we still like miles away from it?
I still think we're miles away from actually getting to a point where it's going to be a major problem. The biggest challenge is it's happening so quickly and change is happening so quickly, and these platforms are developing at a crazy rate. I think the update that Canva brought out, we're starting to implement more of these tools within their platform. It does, to some extent, create a challenge for agencies in regards from a content creation point of view. But
Because
ultimately,
the expectation is lower or higher, or
just
Canva,
because
I played with the tools, and the tools aren't that great at the moment.
I think the challenge is they aren't, but there's an expectation there that it's easy. I think that's the
I
problem,
see.
and I think that's also
Yeah.
part of the challenge and it's always going to be the case, and it always comes out, and that's part of the challenge with the low code / no code movement as well. Is people can start building basic stuff or templated stuff quite quickly, and therefore there's this mindset, the fact that anybody can do it, and I'm like, well, why are you talking to us then? There's that whole element of people expect it to be easy because these tools start making these elements easier to create, and there's a challenge there, I think.
But do you think therefore because I guess my instant thought is like to be a content, like to be a blog company now was like game over, but then I see more and more content writers online talking about how like it's still low quality,
Yeah,
and actually, like, I don't do a lot of social stuff, but when I like on LinkedIn, when you see someone's, like, you can tell when something has been very cleverly wrote, and I
yeah,
don't think we're there yet from that point of view. And if you look, like Canva, for example, is a great tool, but I've tried using like the background remover, which was there before all the AI stuff, is actually pretty good. But
yeah.
their magic eraser stuff, and their, like I from my own experience, doesn't seem that great. But I agree that the advertising for it was like a massive sell. And I think, have you seen
Yeah,
Adobe Firefly, the trailer for that?
yeah. I've been seeing it floating around.
Yeah, like that seems like that seems like what Canva, I think, are trying to do or trying to promise, and that seems like a massive step up if it's real.
Yeah, and the biggest challenge, I think, with a lot of this as well is how these models are trained, where the content that's training these models has come from, and also when people are using these platforms to create and are creating their own versions of from the models, what happens with those versions and whether they're fed back into the model as part of that feeding program, and then who owns the rights to that content that's actually being ultimately created. Because I know from a ChatGPT point of view, they say that you can utilize ChatGPT as a reference or a source point for content that's created from the platform, but ultimately you know that it's being trained from content that has been created, that is owned by somebody and written by somebody. So there's the ownership challenge, which I guess is separate to probably this conversation, is always going to be there, and is going to be a problem ongoing because these models have to be trained somewhere in order to improve. They have to get access to that data and that information. And from an agency that builds and creates, and our craft is in building and creating these experiences, we then have to go, well, if the things we're building and creating are being used to then feed these machines and feed the AI, you then lose some element of your creative IP and ownership as that kind of gets fed back in through the model. Now, the other argument to that is, isn't that what design is?
Yeah, we all copy
Like
stuff anyway.
ultimately, I mean, I used to. I think Dave Burst did a talk at Silicon Beach conference talking about the idea of this dot collecting, the dot collecting element. So
Yeah.
everything you see, everything you do, every conversation you have with any person, they create a dot which allows you to, which basically builds up your knowledge base and your experience as to what you use to create. And ultimately, that's how we design, build, and create. Like we design things based on our experiences, things we've seen, and inspired by mashing these things together. And to some extent, that's ultimately what the AI is doing. So can you argue against that when you think about it from that point of view in its purest form?
I guess it's the speed is the problem. Like
Yeah,
we've uh, reasoned it because the internet was a shiny thing and Wikipedia meant nothing's good to the library. So there wasn't like a bad thing about it. I mean, well, actually, maybe there was. Maybe librarians around the world kicked off big time,
yeah,
and therefore it's the same. It's the same thing. It's just this is like the next generation version of it, and
yeah,
as in human generation version of it. But and I think the argument of, well, they're training on this data, and if they have a license to it or not, I know that like Adobe's big thing is like they're partnered. Well, they own a lot of stock anyway, but they partnered with, I think, iStock or Shutterstock or something like that to basically train it on. They're paid basically to train it on their photos.
yeah,
But then you have to ask yourself, did someone who posted a photo to that stock library 15 years ago, though they said you've got a license to do whatever you want with this, were
yeah,
they, privy to like what that would actually end up being?
yeah.
You know, it's an interesting, um, I think, like you said, that I think that's an ongoing kind of question, and something potentially that will be a case by case thing, the same way that
Yeah.
GDPR is, and the fact that we still give all of our data to big tech companies. The
Yeah.
fines don't
I mean,
outdo the nefariousness.
yeah, I think that's ultimately the thing, isn't it? These platforms are going to be developing. There have been conversations as to if there are ways for us to be able to track ownership through these platforms. How close we are to that is, I guess, a different conversation, and whether or not that's necessary, whether that's needed, and everyone again will have a different viewpoint and a different opinion. Ultimately, back down to the whole point of creation is you can't track where you might be able to get an idea. So if we were to design a mobile app that looked like this, you would find it very difficult sometimes to track the thought process and the
Yeah.
different elements of design that have influenced that design. It depends how. I mean, I like to think that everything we design has ultimately there's going to be some standardized structure to how these things are created, and that's always going to be the challenge. From our point of view, when we're tackling things from a user experience point of view, you could potentially use the models and user platforms to create inspiration
Like
for something. And I
mood
think
type
that's
stuff.
yeah, exactly. I think there's definitely merit in that, and I've heard stories of people who have used it for like they're pitching a film, for example, or they wanted to show an idea. Like they can come up with like scene concepts and scene ideas because they can get what's in there. They're not designers, but they're writers, and they get what's in their head to be able to kind of display in front of them, and they can use that to showcase an idea. And I think there's a lot of power to that for those people who don't have that kind of design skill capability. Um, but yeah, I think it depends how you look at it really in regards to where the opportunities lie. And when we look at it again, back to the point of the experience point of view, there's a whole load of thought process that goes through in designing those experiences. And a lot of those patterns already exist in other applications and other systems. Um, and they're what people are ultimately used to from an experience point of view as well. So until someone
I
else
think
throws,
you're basically saying like you're done. Like actually
I think
like
I
because
just
like
I just
sorry, go on.
No, I still think we're a way off. We're still a way off someone being able to go. I mean, it's back down to that whole templating thing again. Like blog posts tend to have a content structure in regards to what makes them work really well. And some applications, you're building a new social network, you can pretty much buy a clone of that and build a social network. If the social network you're looking to build is exactly the same as that specific social network, if you're
Yeah.
wanting to make a slight pivot or a change to and which you're going to need to if you want to create a network that is going to be able to break into the industry and offer something different, you're going to need to start getting to them and start building custom in order to get to that point. And I still think we're way off that. There's still a lot of work that would need to be done to get to the point of creating that level of bespoke software. I think it will happen. I think actually it would be naive of me to sit here and go, no, I don't think this is going to happen. But at the moment, we're still a bit of a way off that.
So how? Okay, so let's take it a step back. My concern is all these conversations with people is going to end up with like, we're all screwed. We should just all go to an island somewhere and chill out. But
Yeah,
like, okay, so day to day, like you're primarily like people come to you to basically say that we want to design or build an application, a web application, a mobile app, etc., etc. I guess the flow of that engagement and that whole conversation piece hasn't changed today. Like people aren't coming to you yet. I imagine saying, most people are going to come and say, "I've got an idea for a website or an app. Like I want to build this." That was the flow of what I always remember.
yeah.
And then you scare them with the budget, and then if they go away, then they weren't ready. And if they're like, "Okay, maybe," then the conversation progresses. But are we? Have you seen yet people come to you with, "I've got this idea for an app. Here's 10 ways of which it can be built. Here's some designs. Here's the business plan that's been wrote by an LLM." Or, are we still, because I've seen peripheries of that from conversations
Yeah.
that I've had. But again, I feel like, like we said before, like we're seeing this stuff every day and we're merely immersed in it. So we have a
Yeah.
very skewed lens.
So the way I look at that is, I'm at the moment more likely to push people towards those tools than necessarily they are to come to me with them at the moment.
Interesting.
So, for example, I'll have people come to me and say that this is the sort of thing that I'm looking to build, and the challenge there would usually be that budget conversation. And I would be like, okay, these are the things that you need to consider. These are the things you need to think about. Have you looked at this platform as a mechanism of potentially building your first proof of concept so you can then get something off the ground and have something you can test with the market initially, and then we can support you in what happens next in that product. Like, how can we build on it once
Yeah.
you've got to that point? Because usually the biggest challenge could be they're wanting to raise, or it could be they just want to test to see if a product makes sense in the market, and if they haven't got access. Ultimately, this kind of industry from a startup point of view is usually people who are lucky enough to have some funds in the back pocket, have exited because they've been part of an organization in the early days. Usually they don't necessarily have access to those funds, so they need to have something they can test. So I see it very much a case of there's an opportunity there to support people who haven't got that kind of access to funds to be able to get on the ladder, and they're no longer restricted by they have great ideas but are no longer restricted by the need to be able to spend X amount of years building something. Now, when we look at building something and we look at getting something launched, it's not just about a single code base of building an application. Like,
Yeah.
it's not as shallow as that. You've got to look at security, you've got to look at your DevOps, you've got to look at the infrastructure. Like, there's so many things that, and ultimately we're going to start seeing potentially these platforms being built to enable to, and we're still already seeing at the low code, there's some elements of that, but they're not complete enough to be able to build the solid infrastructure in place to be able to make these platforms launch and work, which they're always going to need at some point to be able to have a conversation with somebody who's in the know to do that, or to be able to build those and to be able to support those. They might be able to build something and launch it, but what happens when something goes wrong? Like, who's there to help them kind of fix the thing that they thought this platform was enabled them to do, and it was easy. And they'll always find a sticking point, in which case they're going to need to get that extra level of support. So
Yeah.
you might find that our industry is a place where we go, okay, like, we have the knowledge base and the people who can support those people and taking their next step. We're already seeing agencies that are starting at focusing on low code movement. So they're able to get a product, get it shipped, and then that could be the end to then kind of that continued support. So I think it's a case of, I like to look at these and go, okay, but what are the opportunities for us to streamline the way that we work and mean that the client is paying for where the value really is for them, and we can use these tools to try and streamline some of the extra weight that we're having to do as an agency, and start kind of really focusing and nailing down stuff that's specific to them. So whether we're using these platforms as a base level for research, to be able to go, okay, I need to understand what this market looks like. And again, there's a whole trust conversation there, which is a different conversation as to how much we trust the data that we're getting out of it. But when we look at that data, we can use that, we can 100% get that, pull that down and use that as a base. Like, what are the 10 top startups in this sector that we need to be considering? And we can instantly get 10 potentially startups in that sector that we need to consider to do our competitive analysis on. So we can use these tools to streamline the way that we're working and bring that value back to the client. And that's something I like to see it.
And I think there's a, you know, from my kind of decade in the agency world, it always seemed like there was two types of agencies that existed. You know, there was the ones that cared, in some ways through a fault of their own, and then other ones which was, you know, here's the rate card, like, you know, and it was a business, and it had middle management, and it had this kind of approach, and I think that there's this like with every technology evolution or iteration, the ability to pull the wool over people's eyes is getting less and less, because people know that, you know how equally how easy it is to make a 15-second Instagram ad or TikTok ad, but also how hard it is to make a 15-second Instagram or TikTok ad. But like you said, it becomes this situation whereby if you're just focused on, this is the budget, this is what we want to get, then like any business, it's kind of like, it potentially will just die, and therefore you have to iterate on the value proposition, But then I guess it comes back to then, do you then like if we try not to jump too far to Skynet as the outcome of all this, and we step back and we kind of, if we go on a horizon of like, let's say 2 years, because that is, there is a realistic probability that in 2 years' time, an employee at an organization, instead of going out for RFP for a project, could figure out that by, writing this thing in Notion and then deploy, calling this thing in Canva and this thing in Teams, and I believe that these people don't necessarily massively exist in organizations currently, but I don't think they've had the tools, because they haven't had the coding language that is English, to be able to do these really advanced things. And it kind of makes me question, like what becomes the future of agencies, in the respect of, like, are you just then helping the helpless? Like, not to say bad of any of your clients in any way, but what I mean is then, like, if you kind of look back, and I think back to projects that we did as an agency that went well, and we were kind of just left, we were like, this is the problem, this is the thing we want. We know that this is not our expertise. And then you would utilize them on the thing they understood, like the customer, or the pipeline, or whatever the thing may be. But I wonder if we're getting to the point now where, like, Sally in marketing, like, believes that she can do a better job than the outsourced agency. And now with Midjourney and with Canva and with Stable Diffusion and X and X and X, potentially she can, But then what's the incentive, like on both sides? Like, what then becomes the value proposition for the agency in the context of our conversation? Like, how, like, do you empower that, or do you protect against it, or?
I don't think you can. I think if we ever try and protect against these things, ultimately you're going to be fighting a losing battle. I think we have to look at these things and go, okay, there's potentially a specific type of customer that you might just change and be more picky as the type of agencies or the type of clients you want to work with who understand. There will always be those who use the offline platforms because it allows them to have the freedom to be able to create content and be able to launch that content to the market, to launch that content. I always think there's an element of it's interesting, and also it ultimately depends on how far and how quickly these things start to move. Because and I'm going to go throw a tangent in here because when I was at Web Summit last year, I was chatting to an agency that looked at utilizing Reddit threads as a mechanism for testing ads. So they would create a audience, a AI audience based off personality types from Reddit threads, and use that as a mechanism for testing ads and see whether they work. So back onto the point of where a lot of marketing agencies will fit in, they'll understand what works, they understand what resonates with an audience, and if someone has the capability to go, actually, not only can I create artwork for an ad, I can also run and test it through this AI audience. Then ultimately that is a really dangerous space for ad agencies and other agencies in regards to how they go about implementing that type of content and fighting against it. And then rather than a situation of helping the helpless, you're in a situation where AI becomes this mech suit for marketers, where the tooling is built in such a way where they have the power to be able to ask it to do something, and it does it in a way that is as efficient or more efficient or better than what a human being can do, with the knowledge built off this is what resonates with an audience, or this is what resonates for this specific audience. And I think ultimately with that type of content, I think we're in a position where ultimately we could potentially get there. The challenge then is going, what happens to those people in those specific roles? Do they, rather than becoming an agency, do they just become individuals within entities whose responsibility is to utilize this tool for doing that? Or do they shape and change their role to be able to fit in the world that this then creates?
Yeah, and then I guess it comes more down to like, again, agencies are equally split into two barrels of the people who think and the people that do.
Yeah.
And ironically, thinking was paid more than doing was, but maybe therefore more the people who have conventionally been the agencies that do and have the expertise in doing, that knowledge now becomes actually the thinking, and therefore knowing. I guess it's you can make Midjourney generate you 1,000 images, but knowing which image to pick. Not because you should pick one, but because you should, someone like an ad person or a design person will be like, that's the image we should pick. A UX or a CRO type person would be like, let's take the 100 and run $20 ads against each one and see which one converts the highest.
Yeah. Whereas what we're going to be shifting and changing towards is actually, rather than doing this,
we don't even need images. It's all robots.
Platforms like Canva, where we can actually go, I'm going to automatically generate 100 ads, and in the platform, I'm automatically going to test that with an AI audience.
Yeah.
And see which one is going to resonate. And then we're also going to launch that ad to that audience, and we're going to feed that back into the model based on the reaction that it had and to see if our automatic hypothesis is correct.
Or ask it to then tweak the ad itself.
And it can automatically tweak it based off the 5 test ads that it's run.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be working in the ad industry, creating content for the ad industry anytime in this new world. But we're seeing, ultimately we're seeing, and ultimately it's down to time again. Like the process of using these tools, yes, they're quick, but at the moment there's a friction there that it's imperfect. Like I was looking at outside of my agency life, I've been working on creating a game kind of initially inspired by NFTs, and I was looking to try and generate characters, dynamically generating characters as part of the art style for the game. And the biggest challenge I had was trying to find consistency with enough difference as being a big problem. Like if I tried to put it through DALL-E, everything would be very different, or the quality necessarily wouldn't be there. Where I might put something through another platform, like the images would be beautiful and they'd be really consistent, but I don't want this orc to look exactly the same as this fairy.
Yeah.
I need a little bit more. I need a little bit more flair and variety. So like we're ultimately the platforms are there and getting there and are quite interesting. But in regards to the time to create the assets at the moment, we're still far away from getting there. But from an inspiration point of view and from a pitching and a concepting point of view, at the moment, are brilliant. If I want to pitch a game, if you want to go pitch a game to somebody, you can create it as someone who has ideas. It also almost unlocks that box for someone like me, I guess.
So okay, so at the moment you're like the state of affairs for like you guys is that people aren't coming to you with this stuff yet. We're not there yet, but you are. If people are coming to you, then you've kind of gone. Actually, we can use this stuff to kind of help them figure out if this is actually something they want to massively invest in or drive to the kind of MVP side of things. Internally, how are you seeing this technology? Are you using it from a to help with operations? Are you is the wider team kind of seeing it as something that they can use in their independent roles, or again, are we still in the Kool-Aid box ourselves?
No, so we're 100% using it. I think we're using it with caution. I think it's probably the best. Gumption and caution are probably the two words I would probably use. We can see the power that ultimately it has. From a research point of view, with the team, it's been really good to kind of build up some context, some context for the things that we're doing.
From a
There is
design point
there
of
is
view or market?
mainly from a market point of view, but from both actually. So mainly from a market point of view, from a chat GPT point of view, but also so for example, if we have a client come to us and who's looking for develop a startup or a product in a specific space, we can utilize it to understand who is in the space at the moment and kind of understand who's in the market at the moment, so we can look at those products from a design point of view and see what's resonating well. Um, there's some really interesting companies who are doing a lot of work in the feedback space. So looking at feedback on app store platforms and
Like customer
Reddit
feedback?
and TikTok and customer feedback
Yeah.
who are building dashboards specifically for this thing and have been doing for 5+ however many years. And I think they're really interesting mechanisms for doing that. And it's whether or not things like ChatGPT and these new platforms are going to be able to take those over or make those platforms which ultimately were restricted to those who had a really good skill and understanding of AI modeling and suddenly blow that open. It's really interesting. The way I look at it at the moment, it's interesting that being an AI engineer and the ability to build those types of platforms at the moment is going to be a really important skill in the skill base. The challenge in the long term is going to be: is that role in itself going to be self-destructive?
Yeah.
So when you're looking at the generating creation, so 5-6 years ago, creating models that allowed us to pull content from the web and pull content from feedback platforms and display graphs and charts in regards to how this game is performing. That was then, but now if people are going to be able to start creating those platforms themselves using these tools, at what point is the snake going to eat itself?
Yeah, I saw someone create like Flappy Bird in like an hour or something, or a few hours, like
Yeah.
using the mixture of the two. Um, but I guess it's the like on a the truth bit then obviously plays in. Like if you're using it for research and for market understanding, like where does the it comes back and says pink and red is the color of 2023, and you go to the client and say, right, you need to change your colors to pink and red, guys. And we
Yeah.
turn out that it's blue and green, or ironically, may end up being correct out of luck or out of premonition.
Yeah.
Like, where becomes the line over? You know, actually, I guess the question there is what benefit have you gained from using it over traditional research, apart from, I imagine, time and therefore cost saving, but is there anything else?
No, I think time for me is the biggest. Is probably the biggest challenge. Is the more I use it, the less I trust it,
Yeah.
and I think that's
Because you find that
ultimately
you
the
see the
danger.
errors.
It could be this. So, for example, I don't know, my creative director also has a sunglasses company, for example, and I asked it about that sunglasses company, and it said it was based in the US. And then when I questioned it about it, they goes, "Oh, actually, no, there's no sunglasses company near that name." And I said, "Oh, but there is a sunglasses called with that name, and they found it in this year." And then it was suddenly able to find that information and share it with me. So it's not. It's there's multiple issues there. It's inaccuracy of information and inability to access the information that it does actually have access to and be able to show that
Yeah.
because
Well,
the
what
information's
they call this hallucination thing, where it has no inability, it has no ability of telling you it's wrong or doesn't know. It will
yeah,
it will just predict,
yeah,
and then the
and
refining.
yeah. And what they've got really good at is how they phrase their responses in a way where, and you what you're about to see this more, like the phrase their responses in a way where it's not wrong.
Yes, speculative,
So it might be
subjective.
like, oh, there's no well-known company with this name,
Ah,
and therefore there's this language in there which is, and I'm not a linguist, so I don't necessarily know what that term would be used, but there's language in there that kind of they've included in their responses that
I
means
think
that
it's called the legal
they
department.
yeah, that means that there's an element of protectionism in there. But once you start digging and asking more and more questions, you realize actually it does know that it does have access to that data, but you kind of have to prompt it a little bit further.
Yeah,
But from a research point of view, ultimately you use it as a base. So you go, okay, what is like, you can ask it, for example, to build you content for a pitch deck based on a specific idea, but ultimately, unless ChatGPT is in your head and 100% understands the scope of what it is you're building, it can't really build a pitch deck until
yeah,
it necessarily understands it. It can give you the context and an idea of the sort of things that you need to cover, or what has worked well for something which is similar in that sector. It still needs to understand what kind of the context around the product is going to be. So I think again, it's at the moment we're using it as a mechanism for doing that short term research, looking at potentially competitors who might be in the space, but ultimately in regards to actually doing, it saves us time in that initial piece. But we'll still need to go in and ultimately really sanity check whether or not this is a real competitor. Is it really serving the same market, or is it, I don't know, is it like, if I'm building a platform for, I don't know, ice skating hobby, is it gonna pull me? Is it gonna pull me other ice skating platforms, or is it going to be pulling me other platforms that are similar-ish?
yeah,
If I'm looking for fitness, looking to build a fitness app that is targeted towards people interested in calisthenics, is it also going to bring me in Strava and the other applications that kind of suit a fitness type persona, but aren't necessarily but they might actually still be relevant.
yeah,
But yeah, so it's about kind of going in and spending the extra time doing your due diligence. I can't even say that word, due diligence, and actually kind of focusing down on what that research is telling you, and then going in and doing your own, like creating your concepts and actually testing it with real people and seeing if it works. Although, as we've discussed, the need to test test directly with real people and real end users is probably going to be less and less of a requirement.
yeah. It's so difficult not to just run to the end of the earth of like, it's all a lie, everything's fake, we're all just AI bots that we don't realize yet. But in essence, we are. Like, we do behave in groups. We do typically, spending always goes up before Christmas. It always dips in January. Like, our behaviors are not, unpredictable in any way. If
Yeah,
the media says we're about to run out of vegetables and the supermarket say no, we're not, there won't be any vegetables for 3 weeks.
yeah,
Um, so it makes sense that therefore the grouping mechanic isn't going to be lost.
yeah,
But it does make me wonder, like, what becomes the, you know as you know as you said, like, as an agency where you're getting past that first stage, either because you're assisting and you're empowering and you're helping these individuals or people within organizations to basically validate their idea, because there's nothing, I think you would agree with me, is that there's nothing more painful than working on a project that is not good, and but they can't see it yet. I mean, like it's they need to stay. They believe, and again, there's always the chance that you're wrong, because you don't know the domain. But there's been many times when we would have built stuff and been like, "You sure you want to do this?" And you try and get them to build the minimum thing they can to go to market, to realize that actually that was the wrong execution path, and potentially this enables this to be done quicker. But I agree that whatever that looks like, there is then the next stage, which is, there's a thing that's making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds per year. Like, you can't, at that level, there's very few businesses you can run like that with a single person or like 2 or 3 people in a team. Like, even if you're a dropshipper on Amazon, you're still utilizing the fulfillment system Amazon, which is thousands of people and the whole logistic network. So when you have that type of, how do you see your business now changing, if you do, with this like new push to more AI powered technologies? Like, does this change the business model? Like, does this change the proposition in the respect of, software has always gone through this evolution of being like, the sensible thing is you can't just build it and walk away. Like, you have to iterate it and keep growing. But people don't do that. They get a budget line, they sign something off, or they have a chunk of money, and if it doesn't, only if it works do you then get this kind of thing. But that typically is when you as an agency has a really good affinity and a partnership with that organization, and you basically become an extension. You basically become the product team, pseudo product team of them, and then you can use these tools like to really drive things to a new level. But these tools are now spanning so many areas of a business. Like how do you stay in your lane, or should you stay in your lane as the app people or the website people, when like you can see they're running Google Ads badly? Like, or like, have you thought about any of that in the respect of like, if this stuff does go the way that it essentially looks like it's going to go, what that means in the next kind of 2 years?
Yeah, I think we haven't timelined it out. I think my job as in the agency has always been to look at the market and look at the way things are changing. I think back down to the point. I think I was looking at this. I think about this earlier. Back down to the point of, I don't know, when we had spears, like stone spears, like the people with stone spears and who developed stone spears first were at an advantage because they had these spears where everyone else was not. And I think it's the same with whatever you're moving and whatever you're changing, whatever technology that is. So I think for me, it's a case of being really proactive and aware as to how the market's changing and understanding kind of what the changes are. I kind of bring it back to the low code movement again. It's like that's been around for. It's not in the tech world. I guess it's fairly new. It's been around for a while to some extent, or some people would say it hasn't been around for a while. But the first thing is awareness that exists is the main thing. So, for example, I think you have a conversation, you quickly realize actually a lot of people don't know this stuff exists, or what the capacity is, or what the capability is. So there's a whole education piece that is there. I mean, we looked at the impact of what's been happening with crypto over the last 5 years, and there's still so many people that not only don't know what that is or how it impacted the world, just don't even know that it exists. And I think we're in this sector, in this bubble where we see and hear people talking about ChatGPT all the time, and you kind of lose sight a little bit of actually what's happening out there, in that a lot of people still don't know that this exists and still don't know what's happening with it. So there's an element of, we're kind of in early adopter stage at the moment. If we look at the hype curve, so we have to be aware of the fact that we're still early days. I think the fact that with things like ChatGPT and other tools that we developed, the fact it's coming to market and more people having access to this and testing it and using it and creating ideas for use cases, the faster it will develop and grow. And we're even the last week, the changes and the things that people have been building have been incredible. So I think for me, it's about being aware of it. I still think even over the next 2 years, we'll still be in a position with the way that we shape the agency that will be needed. We're very much not in a stay your lane kind of agency in regards to the work that we do. So we'll go into an organisation, and our work is very much to go in and understand how the business ticks, how the people do their jobs, and work out how we can bring the technology in that's going to enable them to do their jobs better and more efficiently. And ultimately, part of that conversation might be looking at what these tools are and whether or not we could be the team that supports them in integrating these tools within their business. From an AI point of view, we're already doing it in insurance, like the insurance process. A lot of the claims are automatically so many of the claims are automatically signed off using AI already. It's already started. We're already implementing these sorts of tools within these entities. So that's the kind of the way I see it. It's about us educating ourselves, staying aware of what's happening in the market, not looking at it and going, "Oh, we're not gonna. Oh, that's not our wheelhouse." Or that's too scary. We're not going to touch it. Being aware of it and being actually, then this might be a better way of doing it. For building this way and creating this way, while also being aware of and having the experience that we've developed that sometimes these tools aren't ready to be implemented as an end of market product yet.
Yes, I would not want this landing my plane by any means.
Exactly.
I think in the next 2 years, the acceleration of people believing, rightly or wrongly, that they can do more, right? Because the Microsoft marketing messages, this thing is your co-pilot. This is the thing that will, generate your presentation after 3 sentences. Will also do your meeting notes, which actually to me makes you kind of go, surely all this stuff that it's generating it further cements the no need for that particular task. You don't need that meeting. You don't need that PowerPoint if the document was like actually clear and concise, or vice versa. But that that is that's the way the world's going to kind of paint it for the foreseeable. But therefore, could there be therefore the opportunity? Like, I think to be there'll be more of an understanding and not appreciation, but I guess, like, again, agency world historically was always very headcount focused. Like, if you've not got over these different thresholds, like that meant that was the type of company you could go and work with. That was the type of departments you could go into. And I wonder now if, not now, like in the 2-year kind of horizon, smaller agencies or more specialty agencies can utilize this technology to, the whole 10x developer mentality, or 100x now that, obviously everything has to go up exponential.
Exponential.
Let's be honest, like with the company, if they're working with a massive agency or a small agency, they're still working with just 3 people. Like, they say they've got all the other resources that sit on the back, but it's majority of it's, So.
And as a business that works with agencies and through agencies and delivers projects for big clients through agencies, we know that more than anything else.
But I get it. There's a risk element to the companies, and like it's the same reason why consultants, the big consultancy groups still exist in the world. But it does make me think though that actually the output of a smaller agency or a more specialty agency is dramatically going to shift. Either directly because your creative director can now handle 10 projects instead of 3, or because of the education path that you decide to pass on to employees at other companies or the startup founders, which then means they can do more with their knowledge, and therefore you become more of that trusted provider because you're not trying to like hold all the gold coins.
Yeah, But I think we've kind of seen that though. I think, I mean, in the way that the economy of digital has changed quite a lot over the last 10 years. In regards to, you would see these, everyone kind of starting to grapple with, say, like, okay, we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this, and kind of take on more and more services under their belt because they feel they need to in order to be able to deliver. And the big challenge has always been that digital has got more and more complex in regards to what that means, that's become impossible for a lot of agencies to be able to say, and you can kind of laugh at the 7-person agency that says we're experts in branding, web design, mobile app development, chatbot
Film.
creation, film, and
Yeah.
you're like, there's something not quite right here, you know. So I think, we've seen it. We see VR agencies starting up. Where there's agencies that specialize in the creation of chatbots and voice bots, and we're starting to see that shift with everything that happened with lockdown and with COVID and people working remotely. We've seen very much a shift in regards to people thinking, actually, I don't have to work with companies that are in the same city as me. I can start, and I'm not saying all companies work. There's been that dispersal of going, actually, I will look further afield to be able to find these specialists and these people that do the specific things and the specific entities that I need as a business. So we're starting to see very much a shift and change, and it's been transitional, I think. Um, and as you said, in regards to what we're looking at from the AI point of view, there are already agencies building and developing who are specializing in this technology, and there's an opportunity there to look at it and go, well, is it just a case that we're going to see people super niche down even further and go, okay, us as an agency only develop AI
Prompts.
for the insurance industry,
Yeah.
or for or specifically, or for marketing, or I don't know, or for, I don't know, prop tech, like,
Yeah.
or, and is that the way that we're going to start seeing the niche down? We're seeing agencies who develop multiple services who do niche down on those specific types of services, but are we going to see the niche? Are we going to see the niches, or however you'd
Super
phrase,
niche.
however,
Yeah.
yeah, super niching in regards
Yeah.
to both market and capability, or are we just going to see the shift back to in-house of people because the
They're
access
equipped.
and the democratization of technology and the ability to be able to build these things suddenly becomes easier. You don't need to have a massive array of specialities that you could get from your agency. You can then bring a few people in house who understand the technology and have the expertise, who can then suddenly deliver those platforms. Like, you need a CTO, a CMO, and a CDO to be able to, or CCO, just to be able to deliver anything you need within your business, because they understand the nitty gritty of that area, and they can deliver everything that they need because the tools have made it so much easier for them to do that. But I
Mm.
still think we're way off that.
Yeah,
He says for
I
the
agree. I agree, and I think, like you said, I think the horizon for it um, in our worlds day to day, when you're looking at this stuff and you're like, how did they do this? But you're right. A lot of the stuff it produces is questionable in its truthfulness, and knowing, not necessarily knowing when it's right or wrong, but just being aware that it can be wrong. I think a lot of
Yeah,
people, um, I've I've seen people do very complex things in it, but also very simple things in it. The simple things are, making recipes, and then the food's been all right, but not amazing. But then equally, people who've done it and just gone, write me a resignation letter that focuses on this reason to why I want to leave,
yeah,
and that removes a bit of a burden from your life. But equally, I'm sure someone does and I'll save this for an episode when I interview like a solicitor or someone from the legal profession, but like, does then the prompt is there then a legal prompt, that is
yeah,
being very tailored for the wording? So now you're buying a prompt
yeah,
for your resignation letter that abides by UK law of why you want to leave, you know what I mean? Like, or
yeah.
vice versa.
And they are
And I
starting, and
get,
I know there is a case of these legal firms who are utilizing AI to generate and draft legal documents and create precedents and use them in legal cases. So I think they'd definitely be interesting people to have a conversation with, to be able to understand kind of what is, is there going to be a precedent put in place to how legal these documents are, or because they're based on fact, because of the way that they're generated. In fact, I'll just put it based on fact, which I know is the ludicrousy of the whole situation, but because they're based off a model which
Yeah.
isn't able to be tampered with, are they actually better than the one that could be created by a human because there's no emotion in the creation of the certainty or
Yeah.
the reduction of the human risk factor or yeah.
Yeah. But then I guess that for people in the legal field, the subjectiveness is what wins. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
to persuade and I guess equally for the for the agency world and like software development obviously is a clear area where this stuff is massively accelerating the day to day. But again, it equally produces maybe less efficient code, maybe not the wrong code, but definitely less efficient. But it does make me wonder, like, the as a like as an agency, what would you say like the number one thing people come to you for? Like for like a division or a skill set?
It's pretty much it's the UX piece, it's the experience piece, it's being able to design the products to make it work for their customers. So they have a product already that isn't working and needing to kind of take that next step to work out why it's not working and how do we make it work for them.
So you can see like how in that scenario where especially if they already have something already and like you were talking about the AI audiences like to be able to retest different marketing
Yeah,
campaigns or language or I guess just layouts. It becomes this kind of power tool for delivery.
yeah. You can see. I'm already thinking now, like of the companies that could be utilizing this. So Hotjar, for example, which looks at heat maps and looks at how people interact with web pages, the amount of data they've got in regards to how people interact with web pages and the impact of that and the impact of the changes those web pages has on how the way people interact with pages, they 100% could be. I would be really interested to know, based on that data, whether they could start mapping and predicting or suggesting changes based on that. Um,
Mm.
we kind of it's interesting when 5 years ago we would be looking at the conversation on AI and say creative jobs are safe because you can't
Yeah,
replicate the human brain, you can't replicate the human creative process. Um, so I've when I look at the designing from a human experience point of view, I always go, well, you can't necessarily cater for the human element because people are erratic. But
yeah.
actually, if we can predict based on prior experience how people interact with pages and content, and you can use that as a model, can we do that? Like, is there an opportunity there to create a program or a system that can predict how someone's going to interact with that page? But it doesn't save you from new interactions that exist that haven't existed before. The Tinder swipe, for example, like those
Yeah.
interactions which suddenly appear in the market and then everyone's trying to replicate for some reason. So it's just, is there going to be a case where you can't kind of fix and predict for those? But ultimately, I don't know is ultimately the answer to that question, whether or not from an experience design point of view, we could be in a situation where we can put a design into a system and it goes, this is how someone's going to interact with this.
Well, I think the in my kind of utopian like 3 to 5 year world, I wonder if design, and I use this by design I mean like visual elements.
Okay.
So HTML, let's just say for argument's sake, like just doesn't exist. So like
Yeah.
you arrive at a website, it understands what you like and what your objective is, and the whole thing is just generated on the fly.
Yeah.
Um, I haven't quite come to terms if that's good or bad. Um, but it kind of opens up this like, what if you have a model which is, like I remember there was and I don't know if it was how much of it was true, but there was a inside of like Facebook and Google and stuff. There was basically like knobs they could turn to either
Yeah.
drive like spend, users, attention, And then that would tweak obviously behavior parameters on the site. And I wonder if that kind of, that you would need that level of
Yeah.
audience and money and investment, like that Bill's Pet Shop in Cornwall soon will basically be like, these are the products we sell. And actually, maybe not even these are the products to sell. We want to sell stuff to make pets feel better. What do people want? And then the whole website is basically completely I can never say it. Generative.
Yeah.
And to the point that like even then the ad that you see on that website,
Yeah.
of
So you
a
go.
product that may not even exist yet.
So what we ultimately need is GDPR to take a hike for a minute, so we could have a situation where you have a pet charity like Battersea, or one of the big organisations like that, and you could literally, as soon as you land on the page, the site knows exactly what sort of animals you've got. They know your dog's just died,
Yeah.
and it can go, oh, the site knows that you used to have a. This is. I was going to make myself sad thinking about this, but you're going to have a Jack Russell Terrier. Have you thought about adopting Bessie,
Yeah.
who is a 10-year-old Jack Russell Terrier? Because they know exactly that's
Well, and
that's
also they
it.
know that Bessie was your late auntie's name,
Yeah,
like
they can
and
generate.
essentially, yeah, exactly. It's it. On one hand, you can look at that and go, it's horrific,
But on
but
the other hand, you
then
go, wait a second, my life's just got easier.
exactly, and Bessie's now got a home.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, when we talk about the whole level of us being tracked across the web and whether we want. I always press yes. Like, ultimately, if like
It's rubbish anyway. Like,
I'm just like, I want, like, you want to make my life easier. You want to sell stuff to me that I might want. Yes. Like, yeah, you know the fact I look at this, I look at this, and this might be something that I might need. Actually, you've saved me spending time looking for this. What I would rather it did was go, this is your wife's profile. Here's some recommended gifts for her. That would make my
yeah,
life 10 times easier, to be honest. Maybe I need to put a tracker on her computer instead. I don't know. I'm not going to do that.
yeah, that
But it's
doesn't
like,
typically end well.
no, exactly. But it's like, so yeah, 100%. We could be, but ultimately, there's the challenges. There is ultimately, I don't like to say the laws that have been put in place are hampering progress, but ultimately, for those experiences to be able to exist, the laws will need to change in a way that it would enable those things to happen and to make those things easier. Are we gonna have a sub society? There's way maybe we have sub society people who literally refuse to have a phone. Are we going to have a sub society of those that choose to be trapped and that those that don't? And therefore, we have to cater for the experience where we know everything about this person, we know nothing about this person, and we have to cater for both those. We have to cater to some extent for both those experiences. Like Janet is
Well,
getting
yeah,
pictures of dogs, cats, and parrots, but really, she just wants a hamster.
yes, yeah, but I think like when GDPR got kind of enabled, like a few, not many, but a few American sites you would visit, and they'd be like, "You can't. We're not going to show it to you now.
Yeah,
Like we're basically blocking access to you." But actually, I think there is a scenario. I've been looking into some stuff recently, but I think there's a scenario whereby this stuff I think could even live more so under the GDPR, and in fact, actually for a positive. Like, why does your data have to be um, if the web if you go to a website and it's completely generated on the fly, then in theory they don't need to store anything. They just need to understand some preferences like of what you like. Self plug for my self preference prompts video last week. But do you know what I mean? Like the like if someone's desire is to sell a suite of products or a service, and you visit the site and like they don't need to necessarily track you if they can get a sense of preference. There then
yeah,
becomes down to trust of like I'm trusting you're now not going to store my preferences because when I come back
yeah,
I'll tell you them again.
yeah.
So you don't need to
So
store them.
so the web needs to change to a model where identity is owned by the end user, and they have a choice of saying this is who I am as a person,
Yeah.
and all you as a site needs to know is this information and be able to access it. So rather than accepting cookies or accepting to be tracked, you're accepting them to have access to, and it gives you a list of specific bits of information, and you can turn off which bits of information they have access to. And that's the way that it changes.
But the rise of the ChatGPTs and stuff now means it doesn't have to be a list anymore. Like you can describe in language, in this prompt thing I documented was, the ability for you to say, you describe to your assistant, your digital doppelganger, this is basically my life story. When you then visit a new website that you don't particularly know or something you go to every week, it understands your permission. It understands your preferences, but it also understands your permission levels. So when you land on that website and it says, normally it'd give you 84 toggles to say what you want and don't want to share. The natural language response for that is, it pops up and goes, who are you? And then you can write, you can share my likes and dislikes around clothing, no PII, and prompt me if it tries to ask for stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then all them rules underneath, potentially then get pre-configured, or if it looks like we are shifting to an LLM to LLM communication model, then you don't need code. Like it's just a language to language thing.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole other pain and stuff. But I do wonder if we can get. I want to be. I'm going to build something in the next in the short term where basically you can land on this site, share some preferences, or describe yourself, but you could describe someone else, and it will basically just generate the website off the back of that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that could be an interesting way forward. And again, I think that then still just iterates your role in the customer experience domain.
Yeah.
Like this stuff.
How do you shape that experience how do you shape that experience to be able to match what information do we really need in order to make sure that the experience is going to match that end user, and how is that going to work, and how is that going to work and adapt around that specific end user's kind of needs and wants? How can we make sure that we're delivering that content in a way that makes sense to them and can dynamically change kind of depending on who they are, where they are, and when they're viewing the content on the site?
Yeah, fascinating.
But on the side of that, and looking at that and thinking about that in more detail, there's a more powerful way of looking at that as well. Is that, and I don't want to go dark here, but if you know someone's going on the Mind site or going on one of those mental health sites, and you can understand where they are and where they are located and where they're looking for that help, being able to adapt that content and give relevant support and information based on where they're located.
Yeah,
there's loads of power in that. If you could then increase that level of the information of the person, and giving the person back their identity and enabling them to share that information with the platform or the site or whatever it is they're using. It just seems like that natural step forwards. How near to that we are, I guess, is only time will tell. Someone will listen to this conversation and be like, "Bim bam boom, I've built it." Yeah. Like it's not just about your health, like because that's the thing, isn't it? It's like that individual health record that you've got for yourself, and being able to go to any doctor's surgery in the world and being able to go, "This is me. This is my details. This is my problems." Like, and they have access to that information. It's the same just with everything, like your shopping preferences, like the things that you like, things you enjoy, your habits, your hobbies, like all these different elements.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to that fundamental, the cynical part is then, we've built a technology world around harvesting data, which is a massive change of behavior. But also, if you then have the experience, which is generative, for God's sake, if the experience is generated every time and is unique,
Yeah.
then you lose a bit of consistency, which is like from a brand point of view becomes quite an interesting thought process. But also, are you then easily to switch to someone else? Like it really hones in the customer experience, whereby
Yeah.
if I can land on a website, the whole thing changes every time to what it thinks I want. Um, do you lose an element of spontaneity or of random discovery, like you know the like my daughter was doing like a scarf and got halfway through and then came and was like, oh, this is like a coaster now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's quite a
Yeah.
sweet kind of thing, but actually, it's actually quite a cool coaster because it's material, so it absorbs the heat of a cup of tea.
Yeah.
I think the
The
human,
big the big danger as well, and we talked about the bubble.
yeah,
If you're always being shown stuff that is relevant, always being shown the stuff that you like, where is the opportunity for discovery? Where is the opportunity for the new? Where is the opportunity for everything else? And that
maybe
ultimately
you'll have to go
becomes an even
outside.
bigger challenge. Maybe you have to go outside.
Maybe that's how
Because,
humans will come
yeah.
off technology finally and go
I
out
mean,
into the world.
it's interesting because another side thing that I've been working on is um, a social media platform dedicated towards hobbies. And as part of looking at this and exploring this, and there's a few different ones around, starting to understand. There's lots of platforms which are specific to hobbies, like knitting or
Yeah,
Strava for running. Or the challenge is if you're just locked into those specific platforms. Again, there's a challenge then of what is the opportunity for discovery. But another part of that is part of that research has been looking at, and this is off topic, how personality traits fit different hobbies and interests as well. And if you can understand that, you can then start recommending other hobbies and interests
yeah,
based off that element as well. So I think if we do find ourselves in a world where all our things are being displayed to us is based off our requirements and based off who we are as people, we also need to take into consideration the periphery of, oh, because you're interested in the same way shopping does, people who have bought these things have also bought these things. Or the people, oh, you're interested in fitness, maybe you're also interested in cooking, or you're maybe also interested in this sort of thing. And it's kind of making sure that there's an element for discovery and the new around the edges. But then you're still in the challenge then, and I don't know, is what about those people who are on the peripheries who like running?
yeah,
They also like, I don't know, board games. They also like painting, abstract art,
yeah.
knitting, and I don't know. I think of another thing that's randomly come into my head. It's really difficult to think of random things when your brain's just trying to connecting everything together. But you get the idea. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Completely.
those people at the edge cases, are we ultimately in the day? And this is, are we ultimately in danger of creating a world where people fit into specific, everybody fits into specific boxes because we create a world where we think, well, everybody who's into this is also into this, and therefore you must
But
fit
are
in
we
that
not there
area.
already? Isn't that what basically the ad game is? Is like, it's not. We're not doing one-to-one ad generation. It is,
Yeah,
it's like I would never have thought that a cafe themed as Pokemon would be a cool thing to go to. However, and I've never seen one. And we went to Tokyo in Japan, and we went to one thinking we could just walk in. Nope, it's open from 9 a.m. till 10 p.m. and it is booked up solid for 4 months.
wow,
Do you know what I mean? Like, and I know it's Tokyo and it's like the biggest city in the world and stuff, but like it again, you just don't know what you don't know.
yeah,
And I think it just until you're put into like me and my family were traveled for the last 18 months, and though it was obviously different because it was COVID and all that type of stuff. So we got to see things that probably many people hadn't seen countries in a certain way. Um, but again, there was a lot of similarities in people's behavior. Like everyone goes to work 9 to 5, pretty much everywhere in the world. You know, everyone eats dinner. It'll be with a chopstick or a hand or a knife and fork. But we all eat roughly 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you know, some countries think it's really clever to put like a theme park on top of a mountain and use a cable cart to get to it. Like, which makes, when you could just put it on the big flat piece of land next to the mountain. Do you know what I mean? Like, because that's part of the experience, So I think, but unless I think you put yourself, out of it, and I find that from using these technologies day to day, like they're great, and it's definitely a great power user kind of tool. But the response is like, I think of something and I'm like, oh, that'd be a good LinkedIn post, and I try to turn my three lines of blur into like a few paragraphs, and what comes back is the rubbish that I read on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Like it's just it's got none of, rightly or wrongly, or that anyone cares. It's got none of my like DNA in that, and bad grammar. Because also like that's not necessarily for the desire to get people to like it or to comment, but it's also just a way for you to, understand the world a bit more and deconstruct like a thought process. And like you said, like the more and more we use these tools, how much are we creating original thought, or are we going to empower people who've never been able to design before to use Midjourney and think completely differently than, like I've put some stuff into Midjourney that I thought I knew how it would basically create it, and it created it in a different way. And many of the time it's annoying, but like occasionally it'll create something where I'm like, holy, that is like, I hadn't really thought of that perspective before, and it's completely changed, a perspective on something.
But are we at a risk factor here that people are going to get frustrated with the variety?
Yeah.
And as the machines understand what we expect to see, they're going to automatically be trained to improve to give us more of what we want. And as a factor
so like the
of
uniqueness will just become standardized.
Yeah, and I think we're ultimately starting to see that. There's a whole. I mean, it's interesting. I was gutted when Silicon Beach stopped being a thing, because I had this whole concept of creating a presentation called "Don't Delete the Dicks," which is the concept of stop deleting people who disagree with you on social media.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the challenge is, and ultimately we can see this ultimately happening as we start to focus these models in to create more of what we want, is we fit ourselves in these cages, in these bubbles, in these areas of comfort and relatability. And the more that we put technology into the mix, the more we enable ourselves to filter what we're seeing by what we agree with and what we like. The more we get rid of those friends that we don't agree with anymore. We get rid of the people. We stop following people because they're not interested. No, they're not interested in the things that we like. And then we're going to start creating these extra AI elements into the mix that are going to control more of the things that we see based on what we like. And as we travel around the world, we're just going to be seeing adverts relevant to the stuff specifically that we like, because, like Minority Report, they're relevant to the things that are relevant to us.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we're going to be creating a world of just drone people who fit in very specific boxes.
But I think also, if you come from the West, particularly the UK or the US, if you go to most cities in the world, it's identical. Like H&M is everywhere. Like it is. It's actually not as like, you really have to go. Like locations are basically adjusting for tourism they're making it familiar. Like not realizing that actually that's not what you want, but actually, like you said, maybe it is. Like you want to go somewhere for the weather or to be able to have the proximity of different, but in the bubble of comfort and consistency, which loops back to the web kind of site thing of maybe actually if we gave, it would be an interesting experiment if we created a system which generated websites, like would it eventually
Basically.
just generate the same website for everybody?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? It's that we always said, I get back to the point, we always said AI would never take over, they would never be able to beat the human mind because of creativity. But ultimately, we're in a situation where it could defeat creativity because by us creating it to be creative and giving us what we need, it then reduces the stimulus that allows us to be creative, and
Yeah.
in itself it destroys our ability to be creative because it doesn't give us the ability to collect those different dots and those different points of reference. And we will all love that one site, but that looks the same for everybody because we'll all ultimately be fed the same content and we'll be the same person.
But I guess and again, like without going too crazy with it, but I guess when you think about it, it's kind of true. Like we want the water cooler moments. We want to be able to talk about a holiday in a place, or a TV show that we watched, or a meal that we had at a restaurant. Like that's that shared experience, even if you weren't in the room at the same time. Like imagine
Yeah,
all going to the same restaurant and the meal, the menu, the food, the view because you've got some headset on. It's different for everyone. Like where becomes
yeah,
like it really starts to make you think like if I overthink this stuff, I start feeling sick. Like it kind of makes you come back and go like, what is what is it to be human? And the same way that AI, like artificial intelligence, I think it's true. It is artificial intelligence, but we've put such a wrapper around that term, largely through Hollywood and through films and entertainment, that it makes you kind of go, well, actually, there is an element of like, okay, this is intelligence, but then what is intelligence, and
yeah,
what is it to be human, and therefore, how do we protect that? And I never thought I would kind of lean on the edge of that. Like we can build these websites and apps and services, and um, never thought we'd be in a position where we'd be going. It's easy enough to say, like the example we gave, where I was like, you could share your preferences with the website, and then it could change it.
yeah,
But maybe the law becomes that here's the law that says what the website's allowed to ask your preferences. You know,
yeah,
and that becomes the legality bit. Like they can't ask you when your house will be empty,
yeah,
or whatever the thing may be. Um, and yeah, it's gonna be an interesting few years, if not decade,
yeah.
um,
But I think,
for
yeah, I
creation.
think it's crazy. I do think it's crazy. I do think the change has been that we've just seen even the last few weeks that stuff people are building in regards to automation. It does make me think back to the sci-fi films we see where ultimately like work doesn't exist
Mm.
because we're gradually creating technology to do jobs. Like that's ultimately what we're building technology to do. Like we built washing machines to prevent us needing people to clean clothes. Like we've built cars to some extent to allow us to get from one place to allow us to drive ourselves one place to another and not have someone drive us. And now we're building autonomous cars to mean that we don't even need to drive ourselves to places. We're building tools that allow us to write a sentence, and we've got applications or art being created for us. We all these things that we thought were safe from a careers point of view and opportunity point of view is being is kind of being superseded by technology. And although we're not there yet, ultimately, you look at every single job that you can think of, you could ultimately find a way of replacing it one way or another with technology.
Yeah.
And the idea of a world where nobody needs to work is definitely an interesting one and ultimately would allow us all to be a little bit more human because we could be spending our times interacting and being around
Mm.
each other and doing the things that we enjoy, whether that's locked away in a dark room behind a headset or whether that's going through a real life park with real life birds. So it's an interesting to see how long it would take to get from where we are now to that.
Yeah.
And that's also why I think that I can't sit here and go, I don't think. So I can't sit here being naive enough to go, actually, this stuff isn't going to take my job. I just think it's not there yet. And that's all I'm holding on to.
It's a good way to end it, I would say. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for the observations. It was, it's interesting to see how potentially this, like, how this can change and how where we're at, and I think you're right. We're not quite there yet. We're in the bubble of it all, and the progression is quick, but I think we've all seen far too many sci-fi movies, and when this stuff happens, when we see the speed of this stuff, but you have to try and remember back to, like, I try to think back of when was the last time I drank the Kool-Aid of the technology, and I keep self-justifying it as like, no, but this is different. It's like, no, you said that last time. And actually,
it's cyclical as well.
Yeah.
It's cyclical as well. Like we talk about stuff like AR. Like we were working on stuff in AI 11 years ago, and it's still kind of still in the play phases of being used and being implemented. Like QR codes, I'm not sure how many times that's come out as a thing that people are using over and over again for different purposes. So it's kind of, I think we just have to take a little bit of a step back and look at this and go, yes, this is a moment when there's a big kind of boost of activity, but actually, are we also going to see a realization that it's going to take some time to get it to where is going to have the major impact that we're expecting? A couple of engineers experimenting with something over a weekend. How is that going to impact us now? And how long will it take for that to become something which is going to have quite major impact on us? But then you look back and think about Google, and you think about Facebook, and you think about all these elements and how actually in the lifespan of mankind, how quickly that change has actually happened.
Yeah.
And how much smaller that's made the world.
We did. So we were just about to end on the positive, and then we just brought it right back down.
I don't see the world being a small place as being a bad thing.
No, I think it is. I think it's both small and big at the same time, and and a beautiful place. And I would love, like you said, I would love people to be more human. And I think hopefully, like, if we can, who knows what the execution path of it is, but if we can, I feel like the AI stuff at the moment is focusing on the boring stuff people don't want to do. The resume, the resignation letters, the meeting notes, the presentations that they had to do last minute. To some degree, the pitch decks that you go to because you should go to if you got invited, but you're not going to win because the four other agencies they're already working with and blah blah. But it definitely. But I wonder if we can, like, at what point do we make that shift from, it's getting rid of all the rubbish to maybe we don't need the rubbish. Like the pandemic was this big kind of shock to the system of like, oh, like you can't go to the office. So your hand was forced that you have to learn how to work remotely.
Yeah.
But like before that, like people, like it was a taboo thing, in itself. Like we could never do that. And it's like, well, now you legally have to. So
it's a requirement.
Yeah.
And
then people change. But then, I guess that we're seeing that kind of slow fall back slightly, but maybe into the happy medium that people wanted, which kind of shows the desire for human interaction by people wanting more hybrid and roles and stuff.
I do think that the human condition will ultimately always want us to. I mean, it's scientifically proven that being around nature decreases stress. Like there's elements of the human condition which means that the fact that we're going to want to interact with each other to some extent, be in the outdoors, and all these other factors that have to be taken into consideration. So I think I hold on to a little bit of hope that those things are in place.
As long as you're not in the lion cage.
As long as you're not in the lion cage.
Go up. Awesome. Thank you, Gavin.
No worries.